Good day, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar on the Extended Project Qualification, or EPQ. What do students and parents need to know? I'm delighted to welcome onto this evening's webinar Jan Williams, who's Head of Sixth Form and the EPQ Centre Lead at Repton School Al Barsha here in Dubai, the UAE. Hopefully, this evening you'll find this webinar, particularly for parents, extremely insightful and interesting, as Jan explains not only what the EPQ is, but the real benefits to your child as they develop as a person and as a student and as they prepare for the university of their choice in the future. So without any further ado, Jan, over to you and EPQ.
Thank you very much, John. Welcome to everyone, wherever in the world you might be. If you do have any questions, I will be talking a lot. I apologise now, but it's a subject I'm passionate about. So any questions, please just pop them in the Q&A and John will be monitoring that as we go through today. Hopefully this will be useful. So first of all, what is the EPQ? And I will just refer to it as EPQ for now. It doesn't matter which exam board you choose, but the EPQ has some commonalities. First of all, it's an independent research project, and therein is really a large part of its value in the fact that it is an independent piece of work that students can get their teeth into. And they're going to choose a topic that really interests them. So for the first time ever in their school career, they will be able to choose something they really want to do. So even if a student or a child is really interested in history, they might find when they do A-level history or they do history in the IB diploma program that they're not actually covering the era of history that's of particular interest to them. And if that were the case, they could then choose something that really interests them, pre-World War II history, etc., and they can follow their passion. Now, depending on which route they take, and I'll explain more about that soon, they will either write a hefty piece of work, which will be some 5,000 to 6,000 words, depending on the syllabus, or a shorter report, and you'll see the importance of why that might be useful to certain students. So the value of it is it develops really tangible skills. And with the focus being on research and critical thinking, the project, sorry, I've lost my screen. Just give me a moment to get back. Okay. The focus really is on, can they manage their own time? Can they actually present to an audience, which is part of what they're going to have to do? And it builds certain skills, which I will talk more about in a moment. They are going to achieve a level 3 qualification at the end of it. And that means that if you're in the British curriculum, some of you will be familiar with that, they will actually come out with an AS level, a tangible AS level. And they normally take it alongside their A levels, most normally in year 12 or grade 11, or in year 13, grade 12. Now, it's graded in the same way as any A level, A star through to E. But what's unusual is the EPQ AS level is the only AS level standalone that you can get an A star in. So it is really, really valued by universities, but the skills are probably what is more valuable. Now, one of the reasons it's so valuable is certainly in the UK, that they will give reduced conditional offers sometimes. So to put that into some context, a university like Sheffield, for example, biomedical science might be asking for 3 A's for access to that course. However, if you have an EPQ at A star or A, they then can reduce that offer to AAB, for example. So that's something I have seen. But not only that, it gives the person that's writing their reference real evidence of the skills that they've gained. I'll talk more about that in detail in a moment. So the exam boards that offer the EPQ are AQA, which is one that John and I know a lot about, the OCR, which I won't pretend I know a lot about, Pearson Edexcel, which is the one I'm the most familiar with, and Cambridge also offer this as well. There are certain pathways, and that means ways that you can do your EPQ, but that does depend very much on the board that you are pursuing. So, for example, Pearson Edexcel, which I'll talk in more detail about, have 4 distinct ways a student can do it, which really plays to the student's skills. AQA and OCR, however, they do have slightly more flexible approaches, but they typically focus on two main routes, and those are the written report, which in Pearson Edexcel you would call a dissertation. So it's very much, it would have been the one that appealed to me as a student, very much research something and write a written report showing what you have found out, or a production or artifact. So I'm going to talk in more detail about those. The dissertation or the written piece, you have to come up with a piece of evaluative and analytical written work. Now, to do that properly, it's all about the research question. So to put some meat on the bones there, a student can't ask the question really, how does something happen? They might be particularly interested in how a rocket works. Well, that is an already established factual piece. If they write that piece, they will lose lots of marks because there is really no evaluation in that. Whereas if they were to talk about the comparison between traditional rockets and more sustainable rockets, they really then could evaluate the differences, the compare and contrast of that. So this dissertation relies on secondary sources. That means they are going to go out to the research base and they are going to find all of the information. They're going to find the information that they think they're going to need. They're going to evaluate all of that information. They're going to write, it should say, 5,000 to 6,000 words. And the other skill that they're going to learn is how to cite a source properly, and they have to do a bibliography of all their sources. Now, this also encourages them to evaluate the quality of sources. So what we do not want to see at the end of a EPQ is 45 sources that all say Wikipedia, because we all know the value of Wikipedia. It can be very, very valuable or not at all. So we would be expecting them to analyze the quality of their resources, their sources, using distinct analytical tools, which will look at the credibility, the relevance, the timeliness of the resource. Now, obviously, if they're looking at something like CRISPR technology and biology, we would want them to be using very up-to-date research. Whereas if they're looking at something like pre-World War II machinery, the data may be a little bit older. So again, that can be contextual. Now, they do also have the opportunity to do something similar but a little bit different. And that's called the lab investigation or field study. So the ecologists, the geographers, and the scientists are really going to thrive on doing this. And they're going to think of their very own research question. So this is not something that's been studied before. And they're going to design an experiment or do a field study on an area that interests them. So it may be a particular local area. Let's think about a geographer. And there may be a particular river near where they live. And they might want to look at a particular variable, i.e., pollution in the river, and they may want to look at the effect that pollution is having on that river. And they would do that by taking water samples, pH samples, etc., etc. But it has to be their own research. And because of that, they're collecting what we call primary data. I'm sorry if many of you are familiar with these terms already. It means they're getting their own data. They will apply their own statistical tests. They will manipulate the data and analyze it. And then they will come up with an answer to their hypothesis. So their hypothesis may have been that proximity to the sewage plant is affecting this waterway. And then they are going to go out to either prove that or disprove that with their own data. Now, again, it requires full analysis and evaluation of the data. And they have to draw a valid conclusion. So this is very useful for students wanting to go into STEM degrees, because they will look at their hypothesis and then they're going to look at whether their data supports their hypothesis or whether indeed the null hypothesis, i.e. the hypothesis is not supported. Either way, the report is still very valuable, because that's what science research is about. It's about thinking an idea and then finding out whether it's true or not. Now, for the students that aren't big writers and they're not STEM students particularly, there is the option of doing the performance. So this is not the most obvious route to take. However, some students really, really love the way of doing this. It's not dissimilar in a way to doing a GCSE drama piece if you are a thespian, or a musician can do this, or an actor can do it, a juggler could do it, a comedian could do it, a singer could do it. And instead of finding a research question, what they would do is come up with as though someone is coming to them and saying, design a performance that will demonstrate. So a couple of examples of that. last year we managed a project that was looking at mental health in males through the performances of males who had had mental health problems. And that caused the student to do quite a bit of research and evaluation at the start. So there's still a written piece to this. However, the end product of it is going to be the actual performance itself. There is a lot of research there. One of our students this year is doing female representation of women in Dagestan, and that's because she's from Dagestan. It's something she's passionate about, something she knows quite a lot about. She's going to design a dance performance as a representation of the female plight, if you like, in Dagestan. They do still have to evaluate, and this is very difficult for some students to do because they really have to self-reflect. And students find that difficult to do because they feel like if they are self-critical, they're going to score less marks, and that's absolutely not the case. If they can reflect on their progress, how well they kept to their timelines, did they meet their outcome? And if they didn't, what would they do better next time? They are still able to score very high marks. And at the end of this, even though they're doing a performance, it may be a dance, it may be a monologue, they are still going to do the same presentation that every route requires. They will present to an audience that can be online, it can be in person, and they have to communicate what they've found, and they have to answer questions confidently, and they are marked on that as well. And then possibly one of the most interesting that is great for students who are very creative is the artifact route. So they're going to have to design and plan a whole artifact from its inception. So this would probably require some sketch drawings, moving into prototype, showing adaptations made to an artifact. So it really is a creative piece. And I'll give you some examples of pieces I've seen. I had a student, a young lady, who developed she developed a model that was a representation of the Ritz-Carlton in Almaty, Kazakhstan. And she used that model to see, would it satisfy Japanese earthquake standards, because as you may know, Kazakhstan is an earthquake-prone area. So again, a piece that was particularly interesting to her because that's where she lived, but also particularly useful for her because she wanted to go into civil engineering. And so this was a great project to show her outside interest in that subject. Now, they are expected to produce something of really high quality. So if you are not in a position to give a student a design technology lab, or you haven't got those facilities outside, it can be challenging to do. But equally, I've got a student this year who's doing an oil painting, and her oil painting is going, I can't even remember now the actual topic. It's a type of architecture that I can't remember. And she's going to look at that architecture and look at whether it would be used, whether it could be used as a modern day business space, offices. And so she will be doing an oil painting of what the outer facade of the building looks like, and then she will be doing an oil painting on the other side of the building, which will show the inside of the building. It's still equally an artifact, but it could always also be an app. It could be a digital book. As long as it's a thing that is produced at the end and there's a development process, that can be used as an artifact. And again, they have to present what they've done. So they would be expected to bring the artifact to their presentation, talk through how they got to it, what challenges they faced, etc. So the required components for all students, and herein is where they're going to gain a lot of marks, are they're going to have to put forward a proposal form with a timeline, a sort of Gantt chart, if you will. And so they're going to literally talk about how many weeks it's going to take them to do the research, how long it's going to take them to evaluate the research, how long they think they're going to take to write a draft, how long it's then going to take them to evaluate their data if they have data, how long they think it's going to take them to organize their presentation and practice that. And then not only are they expected to put forward the proposal form, but also to measure themselves against that. And that's where the self-reflection is key. They have to show that on their proposal form. But the other way of showing that is their activity log. It's almost like a diary. It's simply not enough for them to say, today I did 2 hours of research. In the activity log, they would be expected to discuss challenges they face. So, for example, I was wanting to look at, and this is a project that's going on right now, I wanted to look at donkeys, mules, and horses and their role in the First World War, and suddenly finding, oh, hang on, there is not an awful lot of research out there about mules, and having to change that to include camels into the research because camels were heavily used in the war, which was an interesting fact to me that I didn't know. So showing the maturity of this isn't going quite how I thought it would be, and this is what I've done to overcome that obstacle is also very valuable and needs to be recorded in their activity log. They will then produce their written project. Everyone has to do some sort of written project, and they will then give pictures, photographs of their artifact if that's needed. And just to go back, sorry, they will also have to present their slides. And so all of this work will be sent through electronically to the exam board in a particular order, labeled in a particular way. And if you have somebody who's very, very sort of confident at coordinating that, that should be seamless because they should be doing it all as time goes on. There should be no rush at the end. It is a stressful project for students to do. I would say that, but the students gain an enormous amount from this. So the thing that they really are going to gain from this is research skills. Now, students aren't very good at researching. I can speak as an IB diploma program teacher and as an A-level teacher. There is very much an air of what are we being taught today, taking in the information that they're given, and then there's not a huge amount of research in there. Now, when they go to university, they're going to be expected to step up and do that. So this is really their first chance at doing that undergraduate level work. They're going to learn how to cite sources. Now, they don't know how to do this. Now, in my day, when I was writing research papers, I was having to do it by hand. And then if I added another source in that was a little bit earlier, I'd have to cross them all out, change all that. I mean, it was a nightmare. Of course, nowadays we have apps and sites that can do that for us. So we train the students in the use of apps such as Zotero, MyBib, and this will not only cite their sources, but then give them a bibliography in exactly the format they want. We're also going to teach them really important skills like what is plagiarism. They don't really understand what that is because they do feel that if they take a chunk of text from Milne et al. And then they put it into the written piece and they write Milne 2006 afterwards, they haven't plagiarized, but of course they have. It's about synthesizing what Milne said and then writing Milne after it. Now, the really key skill here is how they think critically. So coming up with an idea, let's talk about the mules, the donkeys, and the horses. And you might go in with a very preconceived idea about which animals had the worst time during the war. And you might find that at the end of all of your research, you've come up with a completely different idea. And that is real critical evaluation and it's real evidence of it. So they gain an enormous amount from doing this. And I thought it might be nice if I show you some of the students who've done their work and give you a little bit of context to these students. So a young lady who I was working with last year came to us with very, very limited English, but knew an enormous amount about history and was able to do a really exquisite piece, which scored her a grade A, on, as you can see, whether Joseph Stalin succeeded because his opponents were weak or whether it was his skill. And it was honestly an incredible piece of work for a student that had initially struggled with English. And can you imagine how that is? She was writing it all in Cyrillic and then she was converting it over into English. And then, of course, it wasn't quite correct and having to reword that because the translation was very literal. So she is a history student. I want to point out something that's quite important. She was a history student that was not covering Stalin in her course. Had she been covering Stalin in her course, this would have been disallowed. She wouldn't have been able to do this. So you have to make sure there is no crossover with their courses because otherwise they will fall foul of one of the rules and regulations, and then it just will be disallowed. It will be simply rejected by the board. Another example here was a student who is a slightly weaker student, and she looked at two very popular things. Students are very interested in well-being and very interested in social media. And so what she looked at was, and this started, it's an interesting one, it started as a very, very vague question. So it started as, does the use of social media affect the well-being of teenagers? And that had to be refined down and refined down and refined down. And that in itself is a process that is all documented in the activity log. And is all marked as really good evaluation, because one of the key skills is to be able to refine your research question independently. So she did this by use of questionnaires, and she used questionnaires on a body of females in the age group and asked very specific questions, and was then able to draw conclusions. Now, what was really rather beautiful about this was she didn't use a huge group of students, and in any population study where you're using humans, you have to use huge amounts of people to get any valid information. And she didn't. But that did not cause her a problem, because she was able to discuss that in her evaluation and her self-criticism. The fact that she was aware of it, the fact that she talked about what she would do differently next time, was hugely important. And she still got a very good mark for this. Now, the performance angle, I've already given you examples of student projects, but this really could be anything. It could be design a comedy sketch to look at the plight of disabled people. I mean, there are some things, and I'm working in an area of the world where some things are culturally not sensitive. So there are some topics that we would have to steer students away from. But pretty much, as long as it's a sensible topic, pretty much anything can go, as long as they show the development of the piece. So for an artist, for example, they might try 3 different media in order. It might be pottery, it might be oil painting, and it might be ceramics. And then they find that through the development, the best way to present this work is one or the other. And this was my earthquake model from my young lady in Kazakhstan, who's pictured there, and she has given me permission to show her picture. And she built this model of the Ritz-Carlton, and it actually is not too dissimilar to that shape, and anyone who's seen the building will know. And she made her own wobble board, so she made her own earthquake ground, if you like, and then had to look at, I mean, she used the outcome measure as time until collapse to see whether it had been successful or not. There was a lot of panic with that. Things didn't go particularly to plan, but she still managed to get an A at the end of it. So she did very well. So the challenges for the student, if I were to speak to all of my students that have done this, they would all tell you, I mean, without exception, I think they would all tell you that when they're doing the EPQ, they do not enjoy it, because there are so many deadlines. And it really is full on. I sat with a group today and I said, do you know you've got about 7 weeks until first draft? And they all went very pale. And that came as a bit of a reality check. So, you know, the first challenge they're going to have really is the timekeeping aspect, the organisation, hitting the deadlines. And this whole idea of citing and evaluating sources, it's only really by the time they get to the end of the project, they've got the idea of that. And then they think they've evaluated, but they haven't evaluated. They've just stated what certain people said. And it's this skill of, no, what do you think now that you've read all of that? So that's the real skill of evaluation. I just want to talk a little bit about how the project is marked. It's marked in 4 categories, and there is a real importance to talking about this, because we talk about it with the students as well. If they know how the project is being marked, they can clearly gain marks from this. I mean, to be really blunt, they could do a project that was really rubbish, but if they managed it really well and they met all the deadlines and they reflected, then they could still get quite a good mark, because they have satisfied that criteria. They also are marked on how they use resources. So like I said before, if you've got the student that simply looks at Wikipedia and then takes every word they read as gospel truth, they're not going to do well. So it's how well did they select their resources? Have they actually looked at what everybody said and then really critically evaluated? And are the resources they've used really appropriate, i.e., are they timely? Are they in the last 5 years? You know, etc. Do they relate to the actual research question? They're also going to be marked on something called development and realization. So this is really, if I were to put this in a nutshell, it's where they were at the beginning and where they end up. Have they developed a question or a project or a performance? And what have they realized at the end? And you'll see this is where the bulk of the marks are from. And actually, they're going to score a lot of marks here on that activity log, the diary that they're going to fill in. And they're also going to score a huge amount of marks from reflecting on their timeline. Am I up to where I should be? Oh no, okay, I need to do more. written work this week, and actually monitoring that in their diary. And obviously then the creation of the actual project outcome is going to be marked as well. And the review component is, can they reflect on what they've learned? Can they talk about what I would do differently next time? Can they confidently present? I've got to say that we had a huge group that did theirs last year, and the quality of their presentations without one was extraordinary. They were presenting like university dons, and they had so thoroughly understood their projects that it didn't matter what question anyone threw at them. They were either confident enough to say, I'm not sure about that, I'll come back to you, or, oh, yes, what I found out was this. And it was just truly representative of how much they had understood and learned from their projects. And this is the sort of marking grid you'll see. And what we say to our students is, you'll notice it's marked uh, band one, band two, and band three. And what we say to our students is, we don't even want to consider band one and band two. We want you always to be thinking, have I satisfied band three? So the beauty of this as a piece of project work is the student is being told what they have to do. This is not like going into A-level biology and being asked a question on enzymes and not knowing which angle to take. They're being clearly told, is your project plan clear and concise? Have you given thoughtful objectives? Are you thinking about what you want to find out? What was your rationale for doing this? Not, writing down, this is just an interesting topic. Well, I wouldn't say that was particularly a good rationale for doing it. But if you go into talk about the fact that you want to enter aerospace engineering, you have a particular interest in lift over a wing or the Bernoulli effect, then that is a really good rationale for what you want to do. So in a nutshell, I mean, I could talk about EPQ for hours and hours and hours, but I don't want to bore anybody. So in a nutshell, that is the EPQ process. John, it might be nice if you talked a little bit about how EPQ would work from the Bristol Tutorial College side of things, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely, Jan. So the EPQ has to be registered to an educational setting. And one of the businesses that I own is Bristol Tutorial College, which is based in Bristol in England. So it's already an AQA centre, it's a UCAS centre, and we teach students aged 16 to 19. And so we've a fine track record of placing students not only into universities, but having done and completed EPQs in the past previously. So any parents that feel that they would like their child or any student that they know to do the EPQ, they would obviously be coordinated through Bristol Tutorial College and would be under the supervision of Jan. And when it comes to the submission and the marking and the quality assurance and the awarding of a grade, it would be done through AQA and through Bristol Tutorial College. So all of the support would obviously be online, but that's not unusual for an EPQ for students that are working independently and or working internationally. But this, as Jan has mentioned, and it was nice to see Jan mentioning my name alongside and in the same breath as mules, donkeys, and horses, you
Yes,
will
indeed.
be taken through this by Jan, who is a highly experienced EPQ lead. And as you can tell from the presentation, is hugely passionate about it and understands the real granularity of an EPQ and has a tremendous success rate as well. So between Bristol Tutorial College and myself and Jan, your child or any students that you feel would benefit from the EPQ would, yes, it's important to get that half an A level equivalent or an AS level, but actually it's about the skills and the preparation and the ways of working that are the most important outcomes from an EPQ. And as Jan has talked about as well in previous webinars, the research really shows that those students that complete an EPQ prior to going to university not only more likely to stay on and do well at university, but actually the numbers of students that get firsts at the end of universities in the UK that have done EPQs is considerably higher than those that didn't. So again, lots of research to back up that this is a high quality opportunity and a tremendous learning experience for students.
Very
So
much so. Can
Jan,
I just
yeah.
add as well, John, your children will be having references written about them, and that's my arduous task at the moment. The UCAS first deadline's gone now, the Common App first deadlines have gone. Now we're getting all the European, IE, Bocconi, etc. And as a reference writer, you want to write from your heart, and you also want to write about real things rather than generic
Mm,
statements about, Jonathan is always timely. I mean, you would expect that for a student at school. And
yeah.
how much a joy it gives me to be able to write about a student who's applying to Imperial for engineering, and I can talk about the UVB magnetic window he made, that helps with vitamin D deficiency, because in our local area there is a high level of vitamin D deficiency, and the student himself is vitamin D deficient. So how brilliant that if it is 45 degrees outside, you can just magnetically pop a window onto a window, and you can sit in front of that window and absorb the rays that are going to activate the vitamin D that's inactive in your body and solve the problem of vitamin D deficiency. How lovely for me as a reference writer to be able to say, this is actually what he did. This is how innovative he was. This is how creative he was. And this is a budding engineer if ever I saw one, rather than just writing generic statements. So it really is giving reference writers that evidence that they need.
And I can talk from personal experience as well, from having been on advisory boards and governing bodies, that I sit alongside admissions readers from universities like Bristol University, Leeds, Durham, Newcastle, and Edinburgh University, and they talk regularly about how in the changing landscape of personal statements, how important an EPQ is
Mm.
in terms of providing that additional insight into the student and their fit for the university, particularly in the UK. So again, firsthand from the universities, they really value it, and they see it not only as an insight into the student, but it's a real demonstration of their ability to be self-motivated, self-starting, resilient, and see something through to the end. So be committed.
I do want to add as well, I think for a student who is not all of those things that you've just said, and I'll be honest, a lot of them aren't at the beginning and become that. So that's the beauty of the EPQ. But there will be one or two students that don't quite make it, and they can't meet the deadlines, and they simply aren't motivated outside of school.
Mm,
Now, one
yeah.
of the things that is particularly useful from the perspective of a centre and for a student is that you don't have to submit a student's piece of work. Now, if you do an exam, you have to record that exam on your university applications. Whereas if you do an EPQ, you don't necessarily have to submit. Now, I would be advising students who literally have got nothing to submit, do not submit it, because you're going to get a very low mark. And that's actually going to be not only not an advantage, it's going to be a real disadvantage, because if you're showing a grade E EPQ, it's showing that you weren't motivated and you weren't evaluative and you weren't self-critical, blah, blah, blah. So it would not be unusual. I mean, these have to be very well evidenced, and they are marked by Bristol Tutorial College or the centre, and then they are sent off to be checked. And it is in the best interest of the centre to get it absolutely right, because if they don't, that can affect negatively all of the
Mm.
marks of the centre. So it's really important that it's moderated carefully, and that if we believe a student's work is an A star, it really is an A star.
Thanks, Shan. So to all of those on in attendance this evening, thank you very much for joining us. If you'd like any further information, we'll be sending out a recording of this video as well as contact details. So do please get in touch with us, whether it's because you've got a child or a student that you think would benefit from the EPQ, or whether you are in an educational setting and you're interested in setting up your own relationship with one of the exam boards that Jan has mentioned. We're happy to facilitate that as well. But Jan, thank you so much for your passion and your enthusiasm and the detail around how you explained the EPQ and the benefits as well. Very, very thorough. And we look forward to more webinars about not just EPQ, but in the future to do with UCAS, as well as other international options as well that are out there, and how we can best prepare as parents and as guidance counsellors to give students the best direction and the best opportunities for their needs. So
Okay,
thanks
well,
very
thank you
much,
for
Jan.
having me, John. It's been an
Yeah,
absolute pleasure. Thank you.
yeah, nice to see you, Jan. Thanks very much, everyone.
And you.
Bye.